If I were to ask you who the biggest threat to the American economy is, you'd probably point to China's manufacturing might, or perhaps the instability of the Middle East. You see a world of rivals and competitors, but if you want to find the most dangerous threat to the United States, you have to look much closer to home. You have to look in the mirror. Because for the last several years, the United States has been telling itself a lie, a massive, multi-trillion-dollar lie that is currently being sold to the American public as a strategy for national strength. The lie is simple: that America is a self-contained island, that it has outgrown its neighbors, and that it can afford to treat its closest ally, Canada, as a disposable asset. Most people see the current trade wars and the aggressive rhetoric coming out of Washington as a sign of American dominance. But if you look at the raw data of energy, minerals, and manufacturing, you'll see that this dominance is a carefully constructed illusion. The reality is that America is more dependent on Canada today than it was 50 years ago. Yet it is acting like a man trying to cut off his own oxygen supply because he thinks the tank is too heavy. Welcome to the hidden reality of the North American delusion. This is why America is lying to itself about Canada. To understand the lie, we have to start with the myth of energy independence. We have all heard the headlines. America is now the world's largest oil producer. We don't need foreign energy anymore. This is the cornerstone of the modern American ego. But it is a geological half-truth. While it's true that the US produces more light shale oil than anyone else, the American industrial machine, the refineries that produce the diesel for our trucks and the jet fuel for our planes, was built for heavy crude. And the US doesn't have enough of it. Where does that heavy crude come from? Canada. Over 4 million barrels every single day. The lie that America tells itself is that it can go it alone because of the shale revolution. But if you cut off the Canadian heavy crude, the American refinery system doesn't just slow down, it seizes up. Gas prices wouldn't just rise, they would explode, and the American transport system would be paralyzed. Washington is pretending it has the keys to the gas station, but Canada owns the fuel that actually makes the engines run. America is lying to itself about its independence, and the price of that lie is a systemic vulnerability that no amount of fracking can fix. The vulnerability is not a lack of oil, it's a lack of the right oil and the refusal to admit it. And then there is the manufacturing mirage. The current strategy in Washington is reshoring, bringing the factories back to the Sun Belt to protect American jobs. The rhetoric is that the US can build a self-contained industrial base that doesn't need to cross the 49th parallel. But this is a logistical fantasy. The North American economy is not a collection of separate factories. It is a single integrated nervous system. A car part made in Ontario isn't foreign to a factory in Michigan. It is a vital organ. The lie is that the US can de-integrate from Canada without destroying its own competitiveness. If the US imposes 100% tariffs on Canada, it isn't protecting American workers. It is taxing American manufacturers out of existence. By lying to itself about the foreignness of Canadian components, the US is effectively building a wall through its own production lines. The result isn't a stronger America. It's a more expensive, less efficient America that will eventually be crushed by global competitors who aren't busy sabotaging their own supply chains. The vulnerability is not the threat of Canadian trade. It's the American refusal to accept that its economy is continental, not national. But the energy and the factories are only the physical symptoms of the lie. The most dangerous deception is happening in the Arctic. For decades, the US has told itself that Canada is a junior partner in defense, a country that doesn't spend enough and relies on the American umbrella. This narrative allows Washington to treat Canada's territorial claims in the north as an inconvenience. But as the ice melts and the Arctic becomes the new frontier of global trade and warfare, the US is realizing that it physically cannot defend the north without Canada. The lie is that the US can go it alone in the Arctic, but the US only has 2 aging icebreakers, while Russia has over 40. The US has no major deepwater ports in the high Arctic, while Canada has a network of sensors, bases, and communities that have lived there for millennia. By lying to itself about Canada's irrelevance in defense, the US is creating a strategic vacuum. If Washington continues to undermine Canadian sovereignty in the Northwest Passage, it isn't opening the way for American ships. It is opening the way for Chinese and Russian ships. The US is so busy trying to win a diplomatic argument with its ally that it is losing the entire Arctic theater to its enemies. The vulnerability is not Canada's lack of spending. It's America's lack of a partner in a region it cannot control alone. This brings us to the poison pill of the USMCA. As we've seen, the US has used the 2026 review of the trade deal to force Canada into a corner. The lie that Washington is telling its public is that this is about fairness and protecting American interests from Chinese influence. But the reality is that the US is using the trade deal as a tool of coercion. By threatening 100% tariffs, the US isn't negotiating. It is trying to turn Canada into a 51st state in all but name. The lie is that this coercion will lead to a more stable North America. But in reality, it is driving a wedge between the two nations that hasn't existed since the War of 1812. It is pushing Canada, a country that has been America's most loyal friend for a century, to look for new partners in Europe and Asia. By lying to itself about the loyalty of its neighbor, the US is actually creating the very backdoor for foreign influence that it claims to be afraid of. The vulnerability is not Canada's deals with China. It's the American aggression that is making those deals necessary for Canada's survival. So, why is America lying to itself? Because the truth is humbling. The truth is that the United States, for all its power, is not a self-sufficient island. It is a nation that relies on its neighbors for its food, its fuel, its minerals, and its security. The lie of American independence is a comforting story for a country that feels its global grip slipping. It's easier to blame the neighbor for your problems than to admit that your own prosperity is built on a foundation of interdependence. The United States is currently acting like a homeowner who is trying to burn down the neighbor's house because he thinks it's blocking his view, forgetting that they share a common wall. The next time you hear a politician talk about America standing alone or not needing Canada, don't listen to the words. Look at the seams. Look at the refineries in the Midwest. Look at the power lines in the Northeast. Look at the empty icebreaker docks in Alaska. Because in the end, the biggest lie America is telling itself is that it can survive without the one country that makes its existence as a superpower possible. The US and Canada are a single organism, and the day America finally believes its own lie and cuts the cord is the day the American century truly ends. Not because of a foreign invasion, but because of a self-inflicted wound that was sold as a victory.